My name is Janelle Moore. I'm 58 years old. And what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family.
I was 58 when the truth shattered everything I believed my family was. For 35 years, I wasn't just a wife. I was the woman who held our home together. The one who thought a diamond ring meant loyalty, safety, and forever. We raised children under that roof, celebrated birthdays, survived storms. Or so I thought. But all it took was one moment, one careless vibration on his work phone, one message I was never meant to see. Miss you too. 3 words, simple, harmless to anyone else, yet they tore through 35 years of marriage like fire through dry leaves. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't just my husband who betrayed me. It was the life I built, the family I protected, the future I dreamed of. This isn't simply the story of betrayal. It's the story of how a woman loses everything she thought was hers, and the woman she becomes after the ashes settle.
Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
People often assume that betrayal begins with a scream, something loud, something explosive, something dramatic enough to cut the air in half. But mine began with the quiet clinking of utensils in a kitchen that had once been the warmest place in my world. I was sitting at the far end of the table, the oak surface glowing under the soft yellow pendant light. We had chosen that light fixture 29 years ago after roaming through a warehouse in Raleigh until my feet blistered. Back then, Brandon had rubbed my shoulders and whispered jokes into my ear about how we were building a forever home. I believed him. Every word, every promise, every laugh. But on that evening, forever felt like a cruel, distant memory. The kitchen was cozy in a way that should have comforted me. The simmer of short ribs, the faint scent of garlic butter, the rhythmic hum of the dishwasher. But none of it reached me. The warmth around me existed only in theory, like a postcard from a place I no longer lived in. Inside my chest, there was an ache so hollow it rattled when I breathed. My fingers curled around my chamomile tea, but I felt nothing. No warmth, no grounding. Instead, I felt the weight of the wedding ring on my finger pressing into my skin. It was a gold band, simple but meaningful, engraved with "Always Us," Brandon's words, from a time when we didn't need much to feel complete. Now that ring felt like an anchor tying me down to something sinking. I twisted it slowly, watching it catch the kitchen light. After 35 years, I should have felt its comfort. Instead, I felt a coldness radiating from it, a heaviness I couldn't name. It was as if the ring knew something I didn't, or something I had been refusing to see. Behind me, Brandon hummed as he cooked, an off-key but cheerful version of "Just the Way You Are." He always returned to that song whenever he was in a strangely good mood, a performance mood. He swayed slightly as he basted the ribs, apron hugging his waist like he was auditioning for a cooking show. "Dinner's almost ready," he called out, upbeat, as if we were still the same couple we'd been in our 40s, dancing barefoot in this very kitchen, laughing at burnt cookies, arguing over tile colours. But the truth was, we hadn't been us in a long time. These days, Brandon's cheeriness felt rehearsed, polished, too smooth around the edges to be natural, like he was performing the part of a good husband for an audience that no longer applauded. A faint vibration cut through my thoughts. My phone lit up. A small, ordinary vibration. Yet somehow it felt like someone had struck a gong beside my ear. I glanced down, and in an instant, my entire world shifted. "Tasha, I miss you already. Last night felt different. Are you sure she doesn't suspect anything?" The words didn't register at first. They floated on the screen like someone else's tragedy, someone else's devastation. not mine. The name Tasha felt foreign, like a character in a show I didn't watch. The sentence structure was too young, too fresh, too intimate. 24, I would later learn. Barely older than our youngest intern. I didn't blink. I couldn't. My ears started to ring, loud, piercing, an electric shock spreading through my skull. My heart didn't just race, it thrashed, pounding so hard I felt it in my fingertips. Cold crept up my arms like ice water flowing through my veins. Still, I didn't make a sound. The world slowed. My breath stalled halfway in my throat. I read the message again and again. I didn't know how long I stared, but the kitchen tilted around me, the edges blurring, the air thinning. Then a second notification popped up. This one from Brandon's WhatsApp icon on my home screen. I'm here with her now. I'll text later. My body trembled, as if the temperature in the room had dropped 10 degrees. I opened a reply window, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. My fingers typed, "Who do you think you are?" But anger trembled beneath the shock, and I caught myself. I backspaced, slowly, one letter at a time, until the message disappeared, and with it, a version of myself vanished too. I locked the phone and set it down gently, like it might explode if mishandled. Behind me, Brandon turned from the stove with a bright, casual smile that made my stomach twist. He set a plate in front of me, the ribs glistening under the light. The smell should have comforted me. It had for years. But tonight, the aroma turned my stomach. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked. "You've been quiet." I forced my lips into something resembling a smile. I'd worn a lot of masks in my life, professional ones, social ones, but this was the heaviest one I'd ever lifted onto my face. "Just tired," I whispered. He nodded, satisfied with the lie. A long time ago, that lie would have broken my heart. Tonight, it protected me. I picked up my fork and tried a bite. The meat fell off the bone perfectly, Brandon's signature. But when it touched my tongue, I tasted nothing. Just texture. Just the mechanical act of chewing. I swallowed hard, forcing it down like a pebble. Something inside me, something quiet and deep, cracked. After dinner, I excused myself and climbed the stairs slowly, holding the railing like the house had shifted beneath my feet. In our bedroom, I closed the door softly and leaned against it, listening to my own breath tremble. The bedspread was neatly tucked, pillows fluffed in the way I'd always liked them. But the room felt foreign, like I had stepped into someone else's life, someone else's marriage. I walked to the mirror and stared at the woman reflected there. My hair, silvering at the temples, framed a face that had known joy, exhaustion, heartbreak, and resilience. A face I had grown to respect over the years. So why did I feel like she was disappearing? Was it my age? The soft lines around my eyes? The shifting curve of my waistline? I had lived enough years to know that no cosmetic cream could erase 35 years of devotion, and no 24-year-old could mimic it. But Brandon had chosen youth over history. I didn't know the details yet, but I didn't need them. The message was enough. The tone, the familiarity, the intimacy meant for someone who wasn't me. I placed my palm on my chest, feeling my heartbeat, erratic, broken, but still there, still alive. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't shattered, but because the shock had frozen the tears in place. Instead, I whispered into the empty room, "Not yet. I won't fall apart yet." Downstairs, Brandon hummed the same song he always hummed, unaware that the world had ended in the span of a single message. I sat on the bed, hands curled around the edge, and took a long breath. a breath I knew would divide my life into a before and an after. The truth had found me, and whatever came next, I would face it with open eyes. The next morning, the world looked exactly the same, but I wasn't. I moved through the kitchen like a woman walking through a museum of her own life. The coffee machine gurgled, the same light filtered through the blinds, and Brandon sat at the table with his usual crossword puzzle, tapping the eraser end of a pencil like he always did when he got stuck. He looked up and smiled. Morning, beautiful. Beautiful. That word had once made my heart flutter. Now it felt like a poisoned sugar cube dissolving in my tea. Sweet on the outside, lethal at its core. I murmured a response and turned away quickly, opening the fridge just to have something to do. Inside, last night's leftovers, yogurt cups for our granddaughter's visits, and a tray of fruit Brandon had prepared for breakfast, sliced neatly, arranged like a still life painting. It was all so domestic, so normal. Except it wasn't. I sat down across from him, plate untouched. He gestured to the food, eyes twinkling. You've got to try these strawberries, sweetest batch yet. I picked one up, held it for a second, then put it down. I couldn't eat, not when my stomach was tying itself into knots. He kept talking. Some nonsense about a client mix-up at the firm, something about the neighbour's new lawnmower, but I barely heard him. My eyes drifted to the edge of the table. The same table we built together as newlyweds, hands stained with varnish, laughing as we tried to figure out which screw went where. That table had seen birthday cakes, spilled milk, late-night homework sessions, and even one moment where Brandon got down on one knee to propose, again, on our 20th anniversary. How did we get from that to this? I glanced up and found him looking at me, concerned. Everything okay? I nodded, maybe too fast. Just a lot on my mind. He smiled gently. Well, you've always carried the weight of this house on your shoulders, Janelle. That's why I love you. Another poisoned sugar cube. I excused myself from the table and walked toward the living room, where the morning light spilled across the hardwood floors. I stood there, arms crossed tightly, watching the dust dance in the sunbeams. My mind was a carousel of noise, images of that message, of Tasha's name, of Brandon's second phone that I hadn't yet found, but now knew existed. Was this what madness felt like? Not screaming, not throwing things, but doubting your reality while folding the laundry. Because that's what I did next. I folded socks, towels, his undershirts, all while my heart cracked open, one piece at a time. I thought about confronting him right then. I pictured myself slamming the phone on the table, demanding answers, watching his expression shift from confusion to guilt to begging. I imagined the yelling, the tears, the broken dishes, all of it. But instead, I folded the last towel and placed it in the linen closet. I wasn't ready to explode. Not yet. I needed something first. Confirmation. Proof. I needed to see her face. I needed to hear his voice when he lied again. So I waited. That afternoon, I sat by the window with a sketch pad in my lap. I used to design entire homes from scratch, layouts, palettes, textures, but today, my pencil moved without purpose. I sketched circles. Then I sketched the ring. That damn ring. Its outline kept getting heavier, thicker. Almost like my hand knew what my heart wasn't ready to say. That love, when corrupted, doesn't just vanish. It hardens. It weighs you down. It becomes something you have to drag behind you. I thought back to our early years. We were in our 20s, broke and passionate, and too stubborn to quit. We argued about light fixtures, disagreed about backsplash tiles, and kissed in the middle of unfinished rooms. He used to call me his North Star. But somewhere along the way, he stopped looking up, and I stopped shining. It wasn't just the affair, it was the shift. The way his eyes wandered, the way his phone never left his hand, the way he started staying late at work or grabbing drinks with the guys. The worst part, I noticed. I knew. But I convinced myself it was normal, that it was just life. Shame is a quiet thing. It creeps in through cracked windows and settles in your bones. That evening, as we ate leftovers in front of the TV, Brandon laughing at a rerun of Seinfeld, me pretending to care, I caught him glancing at his phone again. His smile was subtle. But I knew. I knew that wasn't Kramer making him smile. I reached for my water glass, steady hands masking the storm inside. And as I took a slow sip, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront him in anger. I wouldn't scream or accuse. No, I would wait. I would let him keep performing. Let him believe I was still fooled. Because sometimes, the best way to uncover the truth is to let the liar feel safe. Besides, I needed to see her with my own eyes. So when he told me, 3 days later, that his niece's friend, Tasha, would be dropping by to return a book she borrowed last summer, I smiled. I said, "How lovely. I'll make tea." And as I stood there in the kitchen, placing lemon slices beside the porcelain cups, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Power. Not revenge, not rage, just a quiet, growing fire in my chest. The kind that says, I see you. I hear the lies, and I am not afraid of the truth. The morning she arrived, the sky was a muted grey, neither stormy nor clear. Just undecided. Like the day itself was holding its breath, unsure of whether to unravel or stay still. I stood at the kitchen counter, slicing lemons with deliberate care. The ceramic teapot was warming on the stove, and I had laid out my favourite porcelain cups, white with blue vines, a gift from my mother. For Tasha, I picked a cheap plastic cup we used for juice when the grandkids came over. A small detail, but deliberate. Brandon was pretending to read the paper, flipping pages too fast to absorb anything. I could feel the nerves vibrating off him like a silent alarm. His foot tapped against the floor, a rhythm he probably didn't even notice. I had seen this version of him before. Nervous Brandon, trying to mask it with casual indifference. It was the same energy he had the first time he met my parents, when we were young and uncertain and full of borrowed confidence. But this wasn't a first date. This was a betrayal being invited in through our front door. I poured the tea, steady hands, calm breath. I even hummed a little tune as I sliced into a blood orange. A part of me stood outside myself, watching this scene like a well-scripted play. And I was the one writing every line. Then came the doorbell. Just one chime. Not frantic, not insistent, but final. Brandon's head jerked toward the sound, his eyes darting to me, as if I might stop him. But I didn't flinch. I set the knife down and wiped my hands on a towel, walking toward the door with measured grace. He stood, half rising, then awkwardly sat back down, unsure of what role he was meant to play. I opened the door. There she was. Tasha. She was exactly what I expected, and yet, not. She wore a soft pink blouse tucked into high-waisted jeans, her hair in a loose ponytail that swayed as she tilted her head and smiled. That smile, so open, so unaware, made something in me ache. She couldn't have known the depth of what she walked into. "Hi, I'm Tasha," she said, her voice higher than I imagined. Brandon said, "Yes," I interrupted gently. "Come in, dear." She stepped inside, glancing around like a guest visiting an exhibit. I noticed how her eyes lingered on the framed photos in the hallway. Our wedding, our children, the grandkids. Her smile faltered for just a second. A flicker, but it was there. She knew. Brandon stayed in the kitchen, frozen like a man awaiting a verdict. I motioned for her to follow me, and when we reached the table, I gestured to the seat across from mine. I placed the plastic cup in front of her and slid the porcelain ones to my side. Small things speak loudly. She noticed. "Oh, I can use a different cup," she offered quickly, nervous now. I smiled. "No need, sweetheart. It's perfect for you." A pause stretched between us, thick and hot. Brandon reached for a strawberry, hand shaking ever so slightly, but I caught him with my eyes before he touched the plate. "Brandon," I said, my voice crisp as autumn air, "why don't you pour the tea?" He obeyed. Good. I studied Tasha as he moved stiffly around the kitchen. Up close, I saw the mascara clumped at the corners of her lashes, the way her fingers fidgeted with a hair tie on her wrist. She couldn't have been more than 24. A child, really. And yet, here she was, tangled in a mess that wasn't entirely of her making. When she finally looked up and met my eyes, I saw the truth flicker there. Shame, confusion, fear. But also something else. Innocence. That was the moment it hit me. Not like a punch, but like a cold wind through an open window. She's not the enemy. She's a symptom. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. "Tasha," I said softly, "do you know how long Brandon and I have been married?" Her eyes widened. He said you were separated. 35 years, I said, overriding her. 3.5 decades, 2 children, 1 granddaughter, 1 dog, 4 moves, 1 bankruptcy, 35 Christmas mornings. She looked down. I continued. "This table," I ran my fingers across the wood. "We built it ourselves, with our bare hands. Every scratch has a story. Every dent came from a life lived together." Brandon sat down now, avoiding my gaze. "And this house," I added, turning toward him, "is not just made of walls. It's made of vows, broken ones, apparently." Tasha's lower lip trembled. "I didn't know. He told me that we were done," I said, my voice still gentle. "That I had moved on? That he was free?" She nodded. I sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that doesn't come from frustration, but from grief. Long, heavy, accumulated grief. "Then let me ask you this, sweetheart. If he lied to me for months, do you really believe he told you the truth?" Her breath hitched. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The realization was settling into her the same way it had settled into me. Slowly, cruelly, with too much clarity. I reached toward the box of tissues beside me and pulled one out, not for myself, for her. "Go home, Tasha," I said softly. "Don't waste your youth trying to fix a man who profits from confusion." She stared at me, stunned. "But you're not mad at me?" I looked her in the eye. I was, for about 12 seconds. Then I remembered what it was like to be your age, to believe a man just because he looked you in the eye and said you were special. She blinked back tears. Brandon opened his mouth to say something, but I raised one hand to stop him. He had said enough. Tasha stood slowly, her cheeks flushed, hands trembling. She looked smaller somehow, humbled by truth. As she walked toward the door, she stopped and turned. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Moore. I really am." "I know," I said, and I meant it. When the door clicked shut behind her, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of all the things he could no longer hide behind. I looked across the table at the man who had shared my bed for 3.5 decades, and I saw him clearly for the first time in years. He was not the man I married. He was not even the man I thought he could still be. And I was not the woman who would beg him to stay. The day after Tasha left, the house settled into a stillness so profound it felt like time itself had paused. Brandon tiptoed around me like I was a lit fuse, but he didn't yet realize. This wasn't about detonation. This was about control. And I had it now. Not because I raised my voice, not because I demanded explanations, but because I knew. And knowledge, when worn with grace, is the most terrifying crown a woman can wear. That morning, I wore mine with pearls. I prepared a fruit platter, mango, strawberries, figs, and a sprig of mint for drama. I laid out linen napkins and poured his coffee into a ceramic mug from our honeymoon in Charleston. And when he walked into the kitchen, his eyes widened just slightly, not because of the meal, but because of me. I was composed, graceful, lethal. "Morning?" I said brightly, the corners of my mouth lifting in a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. He cleared his throat. "Morning? You, slept okay?" "Like a baby." I sipped my tea. "You?" He didn't answer right away, and that was answer enough. We ate in silence, the clink of silverware and the occasional bird chirp outside filling the space. I could feel his nervous glances, measured, guilty, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of eye contact. Instead, I talked. Not about betrayal, not about her, about our children. "Cameron's bringing Lily by next week," I said, cutting a fig. "She's starting to read now, can you believe that?" He blinked. "She's only 4. 4.5, I corrected sweetly. Time moves fast. His eyes dropped to his plate. I continued, as if hosting a brunch for a polite stranger. "I was thinking we could bring down the bassinet from the attic, the one we used for both the boys." He froze, fork halfway to his mouth. "Tasha looked a bit startled by all the family photos," I added, gently tilting my head. Maybe she didn't know she was interrupting 3 generations. Brandon paled. It was surgical, what I was doing. Not vengeance, not cruelty, just the truth, offered with civility and wrapped in the finest china I owned. He tried to shift the energy. "Janelle, But I cut him off, not with anger, but with precision. "Fruit?" I offered, sliding the platter toward him. "You've always liked mango." He took a piece, hands trembling slightly, and that was when I knew. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to cry. I just needed to keep smiling. Because every smile I gave him now was another cut. Quiet, refined, irreversible. We moved to the living room after breakfast, and I brought out the nice tea set. Not the everyday one. The heirloom. China passed down from my grandmother. I polished the silver spoon before placing it in his cup. Brandon watched me like a man unsure if he was still inside a marriage or standing at the edge of a courtroom. "Tell me," I said as I handed him the cup. "Do you remember the night we bought this set?" He nodded slowly. "Your mother's birthday, Wilmington?" "That's right," I sipped. 32 years ago, and yet it still shines. Brandon looked down at his lap. "Janelle, I'm not ready for apologies," I said, soft but firm. "I'm ready for awareness." He looked up, confused. "Awareness?" "Yes." I crossed my legs. "Of what you've destroyed, of what you thought you could have without consequence." The room pulsed with quiet. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth. And that truth settled between us like a storm cloud, with nowhere else to go. Later that afternoon, I opened the old photo albums, left them on the coffee table like casual reading. One showed our wedding. Another, the boys in Halloween costumes. Brandon holding their hands in matching Superman capes. A third, us dancing barefoot in the kitchen. The same kitchen where silence now reigned. He flipped through them with hesitant fingers, each turn of the page another memory weaponized. "I miss this," he whispered, as if speaking to himself. "No," I said gently. "You miss the illusion of this. You forfeited the real thing." And I smiled again. A calm, sad, knowing smile. Not out of pity, not out of superiority, out of clarity. That evening, we sat across from each other again, this time with a chessboard between us. We hadn't played in years. He looked hesitant when I brought it out, but he agreed. I let him make the first move. He tried to be clever, but I countered with elegance. Not to win, just to remind him I knew how to play. 10 moves in, he sighed. "I never meant to hurt you." I tilted my head. "But you did, and not just with Tasha. You started leaving long before her." He stared at the board, unable to move. So I did. Pawn to queen 4. His king was boxed in. It wasn't just a game. It was a metaphor. One I knew he finally understood. As I rose to clear the dishes, I paused behind him, laying a hand gently on his shoulder. "I'm not here to humiliate you, Brandon. I'm here to reclaim myself. The version of me you stopped seeing." He didn't respond, but his silence, for once, wasn't defensive. It was surrender. That night, as I undressed alone in our bedroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in months, I looked directly into my own eyes and didn't look away. I was still standing, still strong, still whole. He had tried to divide me, but I had multiplied. Not in rage, not in revenge, in dignity. And with every smile I had worn today, I had carved a path toward freedom. There are moments in life when the air in a room changes, quietly, imperceptibly, but entirely. The molecules shift, the weight in your chest tightens, and even the light coming through the window seems to avoid your skin. That was the kind of moment we were in. Brandon sat hunched over the coffee table, staring at his hands like they might vanish if he looked hard enough. Tasha stood just to the side of the living room, awkwardly holding the strap of her purse, as if unsure whether to sit, run, or disappear into the floor. She was dressed carefully, clean jeans, a white blouse, soft makeup, but I could see the nervousness clinging to her like perfume. And I was standing. Not because I wanted to loom over them, but because I refused to lower myself again. I had done enough of that over the last 35 years. "I'm going to ask you both," I began, my voice calm but cold, "to listen and not interrupt." Brandon opened his mouth like a reflex, but caught himself. Tasha just nodded, lips pressed tightly together. I walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a simple manila folder, and placed it on the coffee table with a soft thud. It didn't look like much, but inside was the map of his betrayal. Receipts, screenshots, hotel charges, private messages that hadn't been so private after all. I sat down slowly, folding my hands in my lap. "I didn't dig for this," I said. "I didn't snoop or spy. This was all just there, out in the open, like it was waiting for me to find it." Tasha swallowed hard. I opened the folder and slid out the first printout. January 14th, 2 nights at the Carolina Inn. Room 312. You told me you were at the firm's strategy retreat. I laid the receipt down. Brandon shifted, face tightening. February 2nd. $1,875 transfer labeled consulting fee from our joint account. I smiled without warmth. Creative term for jewelry, don't you think? I slid a copy of the bank statement across the table. Then came the texts. I didn't read them aloud. I didn't need to. Just placing them there was enough. Digital intimacy, captured in sharp black text, turned into physical evidence of everything he'd given away without permission. Brandon's voice cracked. "Janelle, please let me explain." I raised my hand. "You'll get your turn. But right now we're dealing in facts, not spin." I turned to Tasha now. She looked pale. "He told me you were separated," she whispered. "That you lived in different rooms. That it was just a formality until the divorce was final." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I studied her face. She wasn't innocent. But she wasn't malicious either. She looked like someone who'd been sold a counterfeit painting, beautiful at first glance, worthless upon closer inspection. "He lied to both of us," I said finally. Brandon leaned forward. "I never stopped loving you." "And yet," I said coolly, "you did. Stop choosing me." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't, because there wasn't anything left to say. I stood again, not for theatrics, but because my body couldn't stay still. I walked toward the window, pulled back the curtain slightly, and looked outside at the dogwood tree we planted on our 10th anniversary. It was blooming again. Life goes on, even when love doesn't. "You know," I said, still facing the window, "I would have respected you more if you had just told me the truth. It would have hurt, yes. But at least I could have seen the wound coming." Silence. Then Tasha's voice, small but steady. "I think I should go." I turned to face her, and something in me, some mother-shaped part of my soul, ached. She was too young for this, too hopeful, too easy to convince. She reminded me of myself, before the years wore my naivety down into intuition. "No," I said gently. "Sit a moment longer." She blinked. "Why?" I walked to the table, took the box of tissues and handed it to her. "Because what happens next will stay with you, and I want you to remember it clearly." She sat, hesitant, holding the tissue like it might disintegrate. "I'm not here to shame you," I said. "You didn't make vows to me. He did. But you do have to understand the weight of what you stepped into." She nodded, eyes brimming. "You're not a monster," I added. "You're just part of the mess he made." That's when she broke. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to apologize, words tumbling out too fast to be coherent. I didn't stop her. I let her cry. Because this wasn't about punishing her. It was about waking her up, and maybe offering her a way out. I reached for her hand and held it. Her eyes widened. "You won't hear this often in your life," I said, squeezing gently. "But here it is. Go. Walk away. Don't stay tangled in someone else's lies." She whispered, "You're not angry?" I smiled, bittersweet. I've wasted enough time being angry. I'd rather be free. She stood slowly, unsure of what to do with her limbs. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Moore. Truly." "I know," I said. "Now leave this place, and don't come back." She turned to go, then paused. "He told me I was different, that I made him feel young." I exhaled softly. "And what did he give you?" She hesitated. "Loneliness." "Exactly," I said. The door closed behind her, and then there were two. Brandon looked shattered. "Good. You're cruel," he whispered. "No," I said, collecting the papers from the table. "I'm clear. And for the first time in years, that feels better than being loved." I stood tall, folder in hand, dignity intact. "We'll talk later," I said. "Not about feelings, about facts, assets, timelines. I'll let my lawyer handle most of it." He stood up. "Janelle, please, don't do this." I looked, him in the eyes. Brandon, I didn't. You did. And with that, I walked upstairs. Not for drama, not to cry, but to pack. They say some betrayals feel like knives in the back. But what they don't tell you is that the worst kind is quieter, like a slow leak in a pipe under the floorboards. You don't notice it at first. Not until the rot sets in. And by then, everything stinks. It was early evening when I walked back into the kitchen. My kitchen, for what I knew might be the last time. Brandon was at the stove again, clinging to the only thing he had left. Routine. He was making short ribs, again. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was tragic. There he stood, stirring betrayal into a pot as if it could ever feed us again. He turned as I entered, hopeful. Too hopeful. "You hungry?" he asked, the words cautious, like they were walking a tightrope across a canyon. No. I walked past him and opened the cabinet under the sink, pulled out a black trash bag, heavy duty, appropriate. He froze. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer right away. I reached for oven mitts, pulled the pot out with care. He'd cooked it low and slow, just like always, and placed it gently on the counter. Then, without ceremony, I tipped the pot and watched the ribs slide out with a sickening slop into the open trash bag. The smell of rosemary and garlic, once comforting, now made my stomach turn. Brandon gasped, stepping forward. "Janelle, why would you—" I tied the bag shut with a single, firm knot. "This is what you gave me," I said quietly, placing the trash aside. "You cooked something beautiful. Lovingly. But once you ruined it with poison, it didn't matter how long it simmered." He looked like a man watching his house burn down, unable to move. I stared at him across the kitchen island. "That's what you did to us." He swallowed hard. "I know I messed up." "No," I said, my voice sharper now. "Stop calling it a mistake, Brandon. You didn't trip and fall into her bed. You lied. You planned. You sustained a second life while sleeping in mine." He looked at the floor, the way guilty men do when they're too tired to keep denying. "I never stopped loving you." "Then why did you stop choosing me?" Silence. I walked past him, into the living room, and opened the coat closet. From behind the winter scarves and forgotten umbrellas, I pulled out the suitcase. It had been packed for days, neatly, quietly. No slamming drawers, no storming around, just intention. He followed me in, still stunned. "Where are you going?" "To Reagan's," I replied, matter of fact. She offered. I accepted. "For how long?" I zipped the suitcase. "Long enough." He sank onto the couch like he couldn't support his own weight. "I never thought it would come to this," he whispered. "That's the thing about choices," I said, turning to him. "They don't feel like consequences until they catch up. I thought you'd forgive me." I tilted my head. I did. For years. I forgave the emotional distance, the cold dinners, the late nights, the locked phone. I forgave so many tiny betrayals, Brandon, I lost count. He looked at me then, truly looked, and he realized the woman standing in front of him wasn't breaking. She was finished. I picked up the manila envelope I'd left on the coffee table. Inside were the legal documents Reagan helped me prepare. Financials, asset lists, questions about retirement accounts. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of thing a woman brings when she's serious. He noticed it. His face crumpled. "You're leaving me?" "No," I corrected. "I'm letting you go. There's a difference." He stood up. "Please, Janelle, we can fix this." I stepped back, gently. You can't fix something you kept breaking for so long. "I'll go to therapy. I'll cut it off." I already have. I looked at him for a long time. I wanted to believe him. God, I really did. But belief needs a foundation, and ours had crumbled. I don't want your apology, I said. I want my peace. Tears welled in his eyes. What about the kids? The grandkids? What do we tell them? The truth, I said. That we tried, that we loved, that we lost, that I chose myself. I turned toward the stairs. There were still things I needed to grab, but then I paused. Brandon, I said over my shoulder, do you remember the toast you gave at our 20th anniversary? He nodded, confused. You said I was the constant in your life, the only thing that made sense when nothing else did. A flicker of a smile touched his lips. I meant it. I know, I said, and I think that's the problem. You loved that I made your life easier. You never once asked if mine was. I went upstairs and moved quickly. Essentials only. A few changes of clothes. Jewelry that meant something. The book I kept by the bed but hadn't opened in months. I left the wedding album, the anniversary cards, the rose petals we pressed between pages once upon a time. Some memories aren't meant to be carried forward. Back downstairs, he was waiting by the door. Will you come back? He asked, barely above a whisper. I looked at him. Really looked. Not with anger. Not with pity. Just with truth. If I do, it won't be for you, I said. It'll be for the version of myself I left behind in this house. He nodded, defeated. I reached for the door handle. The sun was setting. Orange, pink, soft. The kind of sky that makes you think of beginnings, not endings. I stepped outside with my suitcase, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was leaving home. I felt like I was returning to something. Something inside me I hadn't heard from in years. Something that whispered, "You did the right thing." And I believed it. I didn't cry the first night. I thought I would. I expected the tears to come like a flood, the cinematic breakdown, the heaving sobs into a pillow, mascara smudged like in the movies. But it didn't happen that way. Instead, I just lay there, eyes open, still, listening to a ceiling fan hum quietly above me. The room Reagan prepared was soft and clean, like a guest suite in a boutique hotel. She had even tucked a little welcome note under the lamp. Breathe, sleep, heal. But I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even exhale fully. The quiet was too loud. It wasn't like the silence in my old house. That silence was sharp-edged and suspicious, filled with avoidance and unspoken tension. This was different. This was absence, not just of a man, but of a life. Brandon wasn't across from me in bed. He wasn't snoring lightly or scrolling through his phone or murmuring, "Night, babe," without even looking at me. And strangely, it was his absence that made me feel present for the first time in years. I watched the darkness shift across the ceiling, minute by minute. I traced the outline of my body under the sheets, like I was reacquainting myself with someone I hadn't touched in a long time. And maybe I was. The next morning, Reagan didn't ask any questions. She just handed me a mug of coffee, black, the way I used to like it, and a piece of toast with almond butter and a little drizzle of honey. I looked down at the toast and realized I didn't know if I still liked it that way. It had been so long since I made breakfast for myself that I couldn't remember what I preferred. "I think I forgot who I am," I said. Reagan didn't flinch. She just sat across from me, sipping her coffee. "That's okay," she said. "Now you get to remember." She went to work, and I stayed behind, alone, all day. And that's when the grief finally arrived. Not loud, not messy, just slow. I sat on the small couch in her sunroom, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the light filtering through her lace curtains. It dappled across the hardwood floors like little reminders of beauty, of warmth, of time continuing. My body ached with the weight of everything I'd held in for too long. I cried, not just for Brandon, not even for the marriage. I cried for me, for the woman I had been. The woman who had once danced barefoot in the kitchen to Otis Redding, her cheeks flushed from laughter. The woman who stayed up late helping with science projects, then woke up early to iron shirts. The woman who wore the same pair of heels to 12 weddings because money was tight, but still smiled and danced like she was royalty. I cried for the version of me that had gone silent. But grief, I learned that day, doesn't just arrive to break you. Sometimes it shows up to make space for something better. That night, I took a long shower and stood in front of Reagan's mirror, wrapped in a towel, dripping onto the tile. I looked at myself, really looked, the grey roots growing in at my temples, the soft skin under my jaw, the faint lines fanning out from my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel shame. I felt truth. I'd earned every mark on that face, every quiet wrinkle, every scar, even the ones you couldn't see. That's when I made a decision. This chapter of my life wasn't going to be about what I lost. It would be about what I claimed. The next morning, I woke before the sun and made a list in my notebook. A short one. Just 5 things. Learn to sleep alone without fear. Go to the farmer's market without a grocery list. Eat something new, something he never liked. Change your hair. Talk to a lawyer. Simple, but revolutionary. That afternoon, Reagan came home early. She found me organizing her spice rack by scent and telling her dog about my new plan to try Ethiopian food. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Later, she helped me sort through documents, bank accounts, health insurance, the retirement account we'd been building since I was 26. "I'm not here to punish him," I said as I filled in a form. "You're not," she agreed. "You're protecting your future, and that's different." We worked through the numbers together. Joint property, savings, the loan from my parents that was never formally documented but morally undeniable. "We'll get it in writing," Reagan said. "He's not cruel, Janelle. Just careless. But you don't leave your future in the hands of a man who couldn't hold your heart." That sentence stuck with me. That night, I opened the sliding door to her balcony and let the night air in. It was cool, and the sky was dusted with stars. I made a cup of tea, peppermint, not chamomile, and wrapped myself in a blanket. I didn't feel healed, but I no longer felt like I was unraveling, and that felt like progress. Before bed, I sat down and wrote again. I am more than the version of myself I gave away to be loved. Then I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and lay down. Not as a wife, not as a victim, not even as a woman abandoned. Just as Janelle. And she, I was beginning to believe, was someone worth coming home to. The courtroom was colder than I imagined. Not in temperature, but in spirit. The kind of cold that wraps around your spine and reminds you you're not in a place made for comfort. It was built for order, for judgment, for closure. I clutched my leather tote to my side as I walked behind Reagan through the metal detector. My heels clicked against the tile with steady rhythm, but inside me, every step felt like a drumbeat in my chest. It had been 43 days since I left Brandon. 43 days since I walked out the front door with my suitcase, my dignity, and my silence. I had not spoken to him since. I hadn't needed to. Reagan led me to the 4th floor, where the family courtroom was tucked away behind a pair of double doors that looked too ordinary to contain such life-altering moments. As we stepped inside, the walls seemed to close in around me. He was already there. Brandon, sitting at the long table to the left, beside his lawyer, wearing a navy blazer that didn't fit quite like it used to, his face thinner than before, hair more salt than pepper now. He didn't look up when I entered, but I could feel his body react, the way it stiffened, the way his hands paused over the folder in front of him. I stood tall. My dress was deep burgundy, simple, elegant, not for him, not even for the judge, but for me. I needed to wear something that reminded me I was not here as a victim. I was here as a woman who had already survived the worst part. This was just the paperwork. Reagan whispered as we sat. Breathe. We're not here to fight. We're here to finalize. I nodded. But it wasn't easy to breathe in that room. It was too full. Not of people, but of memory. This was the man I had married at 23, the one who held my hand through 2 childbirths, who built a crib from scratch and read Goodnight Moon 500 times with the same silly voice every night. The one who cried when my mother passed, who brought me ginger tea when I was sick, who forgot our anniversary, who stayed late at work, who lied about conferences, who sent messages to another woman while sitting beside me on our couch. It was all there, invisible, but thick in the air between us. The judge entered, and we all stood. She was in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, with clear eyes and a calm demeanor. She didn't look rushed or bored. She looked human, and somehow that made everything harder. She began with a review of the assets, house, accounts, pensions. It was so clinical, so distant from the reality of what was lost. As if 35 years could be reduced to line items and percentages. Reagan spoke on my behalf with practiced grace. Brandon's lawyer didn't object to anything. They had clearly pre-negotiated most of the terms. There were no surprises, until Reagan cleared her throat and brought up the final detail. The $35,000 from Janelle Moore's parents, she said, tone steady. Loaned to the couple in 1996, used as part of the down payment on their home. Though informally documented, there is family testimony and traceable transfer. We ask that the estate be reimbursed from the proceeds of the sale. Brandon shifted. I watched his jaw tighten. I had wondered if this would be the line he refused to cross. But he didn't object. He nodded. That's fair? I swallowed a lump in my throat that surprised me, not because I needed the money, but because I needed the recognition. That what my parents gave mattered. That their sacrifice hadn't been for nothing. The judge glanced at us both. Do either of you wish to speak before we finalize this agreement? Brandon looked at his lawyer, who gave a subtle nod. Then he stood, slowly, cautiously, like he wasn't sure his legs would hold. He turned toward me. I braced myself. I know I don't have the right, he began, voice rough, but I want to say something. I didn't look away. I was a coward, he said. You gave me 35 years, more than I deserved, and I squandered it. Not just with what I did, but with what I stopped doing. I stopped seeing you. He paused, looked down. I didn't fall out of love with you, Janelle. I fell out of honor. And for that, I'm sorry. The room was silent. I felt every word land somewhere deep, where the bruises still hadn't fully faded. I stood. Reagan looked at me, surprised. But she didn't stop me. I faced him, and my voice didn't shake. Thank you for saying that, I said. But the apology isn't what gives me closure. He blinked. The choice does, I continued. The choice to walk away, to rebuild, to not carry the shame you handed me. That's what heals. I took a breath. I forgive you. Not because you made it easy, but because I refuse to be chained to pain that isn't mine anymore. Brandon nodded, eyes glistening. The judge cleared her throat gently. Very well. The court recognizes the terms as presented. The dissolution will be finalized today. She stamped the document. The sound echoed louder than I expected. Final. I sat back down, not with relief, but with an overwhelming stillness. The kind that only comes when the storm has passed. And you're still standing. As we exited the courtroom, Brandon followed a few paces behind. I could hear his steps slow, hesitant. Then, Janelle? I turned in the hallway. He looked tired, but not manipulative. Not like before, just human. I know it's not my place, he said, but I hope someday you find someone who sees you the way I should have. I offered him the smallest smile. I already have, I said. Me. And I walked away. Outside, the world felt different, not because it had changed, but because I had. The sun hit my face, and I didn't flinch. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a woman who had been left. I felt like a woman who had left with her soul intact. There's a certain silence that lives in a new home. It's not the silence of emptiness. It's the silence of possibility. A quiet that waits, watches, asks nothing of you except to simply exist within it. I felt that kind of silence the moment I stepped into my new apartment. A modest second-floor unit in a sleepy Chapel Hill neighborhood where the dogwood trees lined the sidewalks like sentinels of change. I stood just inside the doorway, keys still dangling from my hand, looking out across a space filled with afternoon light and cardboard boxes. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was curious. The living room was small but bright, with a sliding glass door that led to a narrow balcony barely wide enough for 2 chairs and a pot of rosemary. I had no plan for the furniture yet, but I knew where the light hit the floor at 3 p.m., and I knew that was where I'd put my reading chair. My things arrived the next morning, familiar, mismatched pieces of a former life, now being gently repurposed into something new. I unpacked slowly, with intention. No rush, no pressure. Each item I removed from the boxes had to earn its place in this new chapter. The silver-framed wedding photo? No. The brass lamp from my office? Yes. The handmade quilt from my mother? Absolutely. I realized, box by box, that I was building more than a home. I was building a boundary, a space where only the parts of me that still felt true were allowed to stay. In the bedroom, I chose linen sheets in warm rust tones, and I bought a rug that was a little too bold and floral for Brandon's taste, which was precisely why I loved it. I placed a small table by the window and stacked it with my old sketchbooks, hoping one day soon I'd have the heart to draw again. But I didn't force it. I let the space breathe around me. That first week, I didn't do much. I cooked simple meals, walked the neighborhood, let the sun warm my face each morning. I didn't post about the move. I didn't answer every message from friends asking how I was. I gave myself permission to be, and in that stillness, something shifted. One morning, I woke up before dawn, the room still dim, and realized I had slept through the night without waking once. It had been months since I could say that, not because the nightmares had stopped, but because the dread had. That same day, I walked into the local farmer's market and bought flowers just for me. Dahlias, red, orange, radiant. I placed them in a glass vase by the sink, and every time I looked at them, I smiled like they were a secret between me and this new life. Then came the message from Cameron. I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by picture frames and books I hadn't decided whether to keep or donate when my phone buzzed. Cameron. Reagan posted a photo of your new place. It looks great. I know things were rough, but we're proud of you, Mom. Really. I stared at the screen, heart catching in my throat. Not because I didn't know my sons loved me, but because I hadn't realized how deeply I needed their respect. I typed back slowly. Me. Thank you. I didn't expect to feel so steady. It's not easy, but I'm learning to like who I'm becoming. A minute later, he replied with a heart emoji and a simple, "We see her too." I didn't cry. Not right away. But that night, when I finally finished hanging the last piece of art, an abstract canvas I'd painted years ago and forgotten in a closet, I stepped back, looked at the room, and felt it wash over me. I had made something out of the wreckage, not a palace, not a triumph, but a sanctuary, a place where no one raised their voice, where I didn't have to explain my silence, where the only expectations were the ones I set. I brewed a cup of peppermint tea and stepped onto the balcony. The night was cool, the stars dim but honest. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and sat in the old rocking chair that had belonged to my grandmother. As I rocked slowly, I thought about Brandon. I hadn't spoken to him since the courtroom. He hadn't reached out, and I didn't expect him to. Forgiveness had come gently, not as a thunderclap, but as a quiet loosening of my fists. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need him to hurt. I just needed him to no longer define me. That was freedom. And then came the final task, a box labelled Old Memories, sealed with yellowed tape. Inside I found our boys' baby books, concert tickets, anniversary cards, a copy of our wedding invitation, and one photo I'd forgotten existed. It was us. All of us. Brandon, me, Cameron, and Elias, on the beach, maybe 2003. The boys were sunburned and wild, and I had sand in my hair. Brandon's arm was around me. We were laughing, eyes squinting into the wind. For a long while, I just held the photo. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel betrayal. I felt life. The kind that had been messy, real, imperfect, and still somehow beautiful. I didn't throw it away. I placed it in a simple wood frame and set it on the shelf beside my plants and poetry books. Not to remember the man who broke me, but to honor the woman who endured, because I had loved, because I had tried, because I had carried those years, those children, those holidays, and I would carry the lessons too. I didn't need to erase the past to make space for the future. I just needed to stop living in it. That night, I slept with the window cracked open. The breeze carried in the scent of fall, leaves turning, earth cooling, air shifting. I curled into the softness of clean sheets and thought, this isn't the end. It's where I begin. It was a year to the day. I didn't mark it on my calendar, but my body remembered. The same chill in the air, the same slant of sunlight through golden leaves, the same quiet ache that curled around the edge of my ribs. Not pain, not anymore. Just memory. I'd planned to spend the day like I had the others, slowly, peacefully. I'd started with chamomile tea on the balcony, a knitted blanket wrapped around my shoulders, and the sound of distant church bells floating on the air. No obligations, no noise, just space, just stillness. After breakfast, I walked to the park. I wasn't thinking of him, not really. Brandon had become a soft shadow in my life, present only when I let my mind drift back to the woman I used to be. And I no longer lived there. I'd built a different house now, on the inside. One with open windows, sunlight, and rooms filled with truth. But life has a funny way of delivering closure when you're not asking for it. I had just rounded the trail near the pond, my hands full with a bouquet of sunflowers and a warm croissant from the market, when I saw him. He was standing near the wooden footbridge, looking out over the water. A little thinner, a little greyer. His posture stooped just slightly, like something in him had settled, or perhaps folded inward. And just like that, my past stood in front of me. "Janelle?" he called out, hesitant, as if unsure he had the right to say my name. I stopped. We were no longer tethered by marriage, but we were still bound by 35 years of shared life, of children, holidays, laughter, betrayal, and everything in between. "Hello, Brandon," I said gently. He offered a small, worn smile. "May I?" I nodded, and we sat together on the park bench. Not close, not distant, just separate enough to honor the space that now lived between us. He glanced at the flowers in my hands. "Sunflowers. You always did like how they turned toward the light." I gave a soft laugh. "Still do." We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the ducks quacking in the distance and the hum of the world going on as if nothing had happened. But inside me, something had. Something always did when you came face to face with the part of your life that broke you. "I've been meaning to reach out," he said, voice low. "But I didn't know if I should." I turned toward him. "Why now?" He took a breath, his shoulders rising and falling like waves in slow motion. "I saw you the other week, coming out of the bookstore on Franklin Street. You looked happy, free, and it hit me how much I never really understood what that word meant for you." I stayed quiet, letting him fill the silence with whatever he needed to say. "I ruined it," he whispered. "Not just our marriage. I ruined the peace in our home. I thought I could fix it with lies, or time, or denial. But it was never mine to fix after what I did. It was yours to rebuild. And I see, now, you did." He looked at me then, eyes rimmed red but clear. There was no performance in them, no manipulation. Just a man stripped of his illusions. "I don't expect anything from you," he said. "I just wanted to say it out loud, that I was wrong, that you deserved better, that I'm sorry." The park was still. Even the wind seemed to pause. I studied his face. The man who once held my hand at childbirth, who snored too loud, who kissed the back of my neck when I stirred in sleep, who shattered me with a single truth he didn't have the courage to tell me sooner. And I realized something. He no longer held my power. That power, my peace, my identity, my joy, was no longer stored in his hands. It was mine again. "I forgive you, Brandon," I said softly. His head lifted, his breath caught. "But not because you asked," I continued. "I forgave you long before this moment, because I had to, because carrying the weight of what you did became heavier than letting go." His eyes shimmered. "Thank you." I shook my head. "Forgiveness doesn't mean I forget. It doesn't mean I want you back in my life. It means I'm not letting anger shape who I become." He nodded slowly. "I understand." We sat quietly after that. He told me he worked part-time at a local hardware store, that he'd sold the house, rented a small duplex, started taking long walks and volunteering at the animal shelter. Nothing grand. But it sounded honest. "Some days are still hard," he admitted. "The silence, the regret. But I think maybe I needed to lose everything to see anything clearly." I nodded. "Sometimes peace doesn't come from what you keep. It comes from what you release." When we stood, there was no fanfare, no dramatic farewell. He didn't ask to meet again, and I didn't offer. But just before he walked away, he turned back. "You look good, Janelle. Like yourself again." I smiled. "That's because I finally am. He smiled too, and then he was gone. I walked the rest of the path with slow steps, the sunflowers warm in my arms. I passed a family having a picnic, an elderly woman reading beneath a tree, two teenagers practicing dance moves on the sidewalk. The world pulsed with ordinary life, and I was part of it again. Back home, I placed the sunflowers in the tall glass vase by my kitchen window. They leaned toward the light automatically, unapologetically. So did I. I brewed tea, played Etta James on the record player, and sat on the floor of my apartment surrounded by softness, woven blankets, candlelight, and the quiet humming of peace. I picked up my sketch pad, untouched for months, and began to draw again. Not for anyone else, just for me. And later, as dusk settled into evening, I lit the fireplace and stared up at the art piece above my mantel. A simple hand-painted quote I'd found in a thrift shop. Build the home you want to live in, on the inside. That home now had wide open spaces, a front door that locked from the inside, rooms where no voices shouted, and a garden of forgiveness blooming in every corner. I still kept the photo of our family on the shelf, not out of sentiment, but out of truth. It was a chapter, not the whole story, and it belonged to the woman I had once been, who deserved to be remembered, not erased. Because healing doesn't mean denying the pain. It means becoming someone new because of it. That night, as I curled beneath the quilt my mother once stitched by hand, I whispered a thank you into the dark. To the old house I left behind. To the woman who walked away with trembling hands. To the peace that came quietly. To the forgiveness that asked for nothing in return. And to the home I had finally built inside myself. One with no locks, no ghosts, and no need for permission to feel whole. There are wounds that leave no blood. They quietly fester within, like trust betrayed, like love turned into a burden. But Janelle did not choose to remain in anger. She chose to walk away, to rebuild a home within herself, one where no one could ever hurt her again. This story isn't about revenge with knives or cruelty. It's about revenge through living better, through a peace so deep that those who once hurt us no longer have the power to control our hearts. If you've ever stood at the crossroads of a love that had decayed, if you've ever forgiven, not because they deserved it, but because you deserved peace, please share your feelings below. Tell me, what part of Janelle's story moved you the most? And do you believe that forgiveness is truly the strongest form of revenge?